of people wonder, well, why are they called new atheists? And we'll talk about that. There's guys there are Richard Dawkins, the author of The God Delusion. He was a former Oxford professor. Christopher Hitchens wrote God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Gee, I wonder where he's coming from. Sam Harris wrote The End of Faith and Letter to a Christian Nation. And then Daniel Dennett wrote Breaking the Spell. And the reason why these guys are called the new atheists is basically because they're more passionate and less rational than traditional atheists. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying traditional atheists are rational in that I think their arguments are really, rationally sound. But at least the older atheists tried to reason for atheism. These guys come on the scene and they assume that debate was won by the atheists. I just don't know what debates they're talking about. But they act like that debate was won by the atheists. Now let's move on, because we know how intolerant and evil traditional religions are. And so it's more militant. New atheists are more likely to appeal to emotion, and they attack Christianity and other traditional religions for being intolerant. So that they're acting like, look, we know only an ignoramus would believe in God. And we know how harmful religion is. If we could just get rid of traditional religion, mankind would live in peace, we could save the planet. So why don't, are we the only guys courageous enough to say this? But, Richard Dawkins will refer to teaching children about God as child abuse. So if you see an elderly lady and she's teaching children, 4th grade children in a Sunday school class, that's child abuse. She's a child abuser. Now Dawkins doesn't say, therefore, she needs to be locked up, but that's what's implied. Richard Dawkins is glad that child abusers get locked up, and now he's calling us child abusers. When you corner these guys, they'll always act like, well, I'm not here to make the laws. That's what the lawyers and the judge will talk about. I'm just here to give you the brilliant thought, or whatever. And but they know exactly where it's leading and what it is they're calling for. So when I debated Dr. Michael Martin at Boston University, who was one of America's leading atheists in the 1990s. It was back in 1997, and it was a debate over the internet. And you can still look up that debate and read the transcript over the internet on Internet Infidels, the world's largest atheist website. And but the Michael Martin type atheist, he was probably the last of the big name atheists that were the old atheists. So he gives you lots and lots of philosophical arguments. You have to really do your homework to refute him. With the new atheists, you'll read sometimes 30, 40, 50 pages, and you just put the book down and say, okay, so far I haven't found an argument. And then you read another 30 or 40 pages, and you're still waiting for an argument. I mean, the guy's throwing a tantrum in print, telling you why he hates God. He hates this God that he doesn't believe exists. But you don't see any real argumentation. And then finally, like the God Delusion, you'll see about 4 or 5 pages of argumentation from Dawkins, if you could call it that. And I think in a page and a half, he tries to refute Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways to prove God's existence, which proves that he just doesn't understand Aquinas, because you can't even understand Aquinas' 5 ways to prove God's existence unless you have a background in Aristotelian philosophy, because Aquinas, that's the foundation and the terminology. And so it's like his 5 ways to prove God's existence are conclusions to a whole lot of philosophical thought that goes into it. So anybody who thinks you can just answer those arguments in a page and a half is obviously, it's really not learned. It's not really, has not read Aquinas or understood Aquinas. And so it's rather embarrassing when guys like William Lane Craig, Christian apologists like William Lane Craig, read these guys to prepare to debate them. And he's debated Hitchens, He wanted to debate Dawkins, but Dawkins claimed that he never heard of Craig or whatever. But Dawkins is not picky about who he debates, so I'm sure he has heard of Craig, and he knows who he is, and that's probably why he doesn't want to debate him. But whatever the case, it's difficult for guys like Craig to read these guys' stuff and then act like, okay, this is some serious argumentation I need to refute, because it really isn't. Again, it's like these guys are throwing a tantrum on paper. And so that's what the new atheist, emotional outburst, impatience, they've run out of patience for Christianity, and so it's kind of like a call to action. So it's almost like these, instead of being atheist thinkers, they're like atheist activists who are trying to call the troops to action, okay? Now, apparently what happened when they started writing their works, they thought that atheism was finally on the rise. Don't forget, atheistic evolution has controlled our education now in this country for at least 60 or 70 years, and it was making inroads even a generation before that. Yet, statistics show that I think it's over 50% of Americans still do not believe in evolution. And most of the ones who do believe in evolution believe God used evolution. So when it comes down to people who say, yeah, I don't believe that God exists, I'm an atheistic evolutionist, you're only talking between 4 to 6% of Americans today. What happened was, though, the fastest growing group is a group that classifies themselves as non-religious. And so the atheists assumed that this fast-growing group were atheists. Well, now a lot of the research has been more specific, especially coming out of Baylor University. And in their research, they're asking specific questions about why you classify yourself as non-religious and things of that sort. And what they're finding out is a big chunk of the non-religious actually hold to Christian beliefs. It's just that when they were in college or in their adult life, they got out of the habit of going to church, so they classify themselves as non-religious because they're not affiliated to any church, or they're disenchanted with the evangelical church, so they still profess faith in Christ. And I'm not excusing them for not going to church. Basically what I'm saying is a chunk of this group really hold to Christian beliefs. Probably the biggest percentage of the group of non-religious are basically what I would call neo-pagan or New Age. So they believe in some type of God, but they think they're Him. They believe God is the universe, or at least the universe is God's body, something along those lines. So in other words, what they're finding is that non-religious group, only a tiny fraction of them are either atheist or hard agnostic. So hard agnostic believes God probably doesn't exist. The evidence is weighed against him. He probably doesn't exist. A soft agnostic would say, well, I don't believe God exists. I haven't seen the evidence, but there might be good evidence that He exists. And so, so if you're ever dialoguing with a soft agnostic, they're usually open to dialogue, and they're willing to look at least they claim to be willing to look at evidence. So whatever the case, you think of the new atheist, think of highly emotional, impatient people who have an agenda. They're acting like, look, we know these Christians are Neanderthals. We can't progress as we're evolving.